The agenda this week considered climate change solutions. We looked at where intelligence meets success and evaluated efforts to stem sexual harassment. The agenda's Week in Review begins with getting behind the GMO hype. Manish, what are GMOs?
Well, I need to start with some background. So all organisms have chromosomes. A lot of people think that plants don't, but plants have DNA. And so if this is a strand of DNA, and a chromosome is actually much longer than this, it consists of thousands of genes. So plants, let's say, have 25,000 genes. So if I take a small portion of it and amplify it up, it's an instruction book. And it's an instruction book for enzymes. So let's imagine that I'm an enzyme. What do? Well, all of life is basically you build blocks together until you have strands of DNA, strands of protein, cells, and organisms. So what an enzyme does is, imagine these are two molecules and they're floating inside a cell. What an enzyme does is it grabs onto one of them on one side and grabs onto the other one on the other side, and now they're close together and they react, and you can build building blocks. So what a gene is an instruction book to make the enzyme to bring these molecules together. What a GMO is a case where you take one of these instruction books for one of these enzymes, and you take it from one species and you put it into another species.
Anything, Henry, you would add to that? That was very well done, incidentally. I love the props, and that was good.
Thank you.
Anything you'd add to that, Henry?
No, not at all. He's the geneticist.
He nailed it.
Yes, he did.
Okay. Christy, anything you would add to that?
I'm not a geneticist, but I have listened to a lot of people talk to me about this, and from what I understand too, that the DNA has to do with the protein folding too. So this is the DNA, and then it gets all folded up, and we don't actually understand why and how it gets folded. And where those parts of the strand touches, that's what starts to create different kinds of proteins and different kinds of enzymes that are produced.
I think there's two parts of this. So the DNA itself is just DNA. It's a different type. It's a molecule. It codes for the enzyme. I'm the enzyme, and that's the protein. And it's my folding that is critical.
And we don't totally understand how the protein folding implicates what kinds of things get produced in the body.
There's a lot of studies around protein folding. I think what you mean is understanding how proteins fold. That's part of the mystery. Understanding the final fold is very well understood.
My concern with the geneticists' take on GMOs is that there's lots of things we don't understand. And from what I understand, we have mapped the genome, the human genome, but we still don't understand how all of the functions in our body are related. And now they're creating a biome project that's trying to link our genetics with all of the bacteria that live in our body. Our body is more bacteria cells than human cells. So we aren't just genes, and we aren't just one easily identifiable set of, in an order. There's so many layers to how we then relate and how that interacts with our body and how we interact with the environment.
Would you say, Henry, that we don't, as much as we do know about this, we don't know enough about this yet to make a categorical conclusion about it?
Yes, I would agree with that. So what Christy said, I think, is correct on the face of it. But if you're going to go that route, then we can easily say that we don't know about non-GM foods. If we really don't understand the interactions, if we really don't understand the biome and all the other effects, then what do we know about non-GM corn? What do we know about non-GM canola?
Well, we know we've been eating it for hundreds of years.
Exactly, and we've been okay, I think. Yes.
And if I could add, Christy's absolutely right about this. And I think there needs to be regulatory incentives to ensure that companies who are creating GMOs take advantage of newer technologies that can look at secondary effects. Because if I'm an enzyme, I do interact with other proteins inside an organism. There are emerging technologies to study that better. And that won't completely address Christy's concern, which is a legitimate one. But right now, we don't necessarily have the regulatory incentives for companies to even start to go down that route.
Give us a bit of a checklist here. What crops would you see be genetically modified at the moment?
Well, this is a good question, because whenever I see people eat a large cucumber or a large tomato, they assume that it's genetically modified. In fact, hardly any, very few of the crops that we eat are actually genetically modified. And there's actually very few types of genes involved. In Canada, it's primarily corn, canola, soybeans are three of the most common ones. There was an approval for an apple recently, but really otherwise there's no fruits or vegetables that have been approved in Canada.
And why do it?
Essentially, most of the GMOs that are out there today are to help farmers, are to help production. And I think the reason that the general public in some ways is against this is they don't see the direct benefits to it of GMOs. Farmers do. See, I think consumers are willing to take risks. They take risks all the time when they consume pharmaceuticals, right? If you see U.S. drug commercials of a particular drug, like why would anyone buy that drug? There's so many disclaimers, but they see the benefits of that drug. GMOs are an example where consumers don't see the direct benefits of it, farmers do.
All right, you're representing farmers here. What benefits, you don't recognize the benefits that he says
No.
your group ought to.
We work with farmers, and we primarily work with ecological farming practices. So I'm not here representing conventional soy and corn producers. I'm here representing new farmers who are looking at how we can create resilient and sustainable and economically viable farming systems. And I would take issue with the fact that they're helping farmers. I don't think they are. They were purported to reduce glyphosate or herbicide use, which is a chemical farmers have to buy and then apply to their fields. And it effectively kills everything in their field except for the genetically modified corn, which is left standing. So every other plant. So it's an easy way to plant corn, but it doesn't mean that it costs the farmers that much less. And although that there were purported increases in production, long-term studies, such as the Rodale Institute's 27-year side-by-side study, has shown that organic systems side-by-side the conventional systems, there is no difference in production. And even in years of drought or in years of stress, so either drought or flooding, the organic systems do far better, 30 to 75% more yield than the conventional systems.
But those aren't the only options, obviously.
It's not organic versus conventional.
Right.
No, there's a whole spectrum in between. But if we're talking about a system that's building soil health, building an integrated, vibrant, living ecosystem in which the plants are thriving, with insects, with other kinds of species, pollinators, everything engaged, versus a system where we essentially burn the earth and plant the seed that we want to grow, and it's one crop, and that typically is the crop, same crop year after year after year, or it's maybe a corn and soy rotation.
Henry, how legitimate do you think those concerns are?
I think there is some legitimacy behind some of those concerns, but I think you're slightly exaggerating the difference between GM and conventional crops. So you describe organic and it's healthy for the soil and it's better for the environment. I'm not going to disagree with that. There are studies that show that that's the case. I am going to disagree a little bit with your production numbers saying that organic does 30 to 75% better than GM or conventional. So in certain years of stress, organic may do better. But I don't think that's the case throughout for all organic crops, for all types of stressors. Getting back to Manisha's point, he's correct in pointing out that the first generation of GM crops has predominantly benefited producers, their processed traits. However, the second generation should benefit consumers. For example, golden rice, that's probably the most commonly discussed second generation of GM crops. And then we have potentially third generation GM crops, which we use to produce pharmaceuticals. And I think once those come out, people start to be perhaps more receptive to it, although I don't know.
Recent months have seen several public instances of sexual harassment, instances that have led to spirited debates over root causes and the best way to change behavior. Joining us now for their insights on the matter, in the nation's capital, Julie Lalonde, public educator with the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centres. Back here in Toronto, Oren Amate, psychologist who practices here in Toronto, Ann Kingston, senior writer with Maclean's Magazine, and Margaret Wente, columnist with the Globe and Mail, and we're happy to welcome everybody to the program today. Julie, I'm going to start with you in Ottawa because off the top of the program we did list several recent examples of sexual harassment, and I wonder if you think we are actually seeing more cases of this, or are we simply talking about it more?
I don't believe we're actually seeing an increase in sexual harassment right now. I mean, time will tell whether or not we look back on this moment and compare statistically, but I really do think the difference right now, what we're seeing, is that people are just fed up and they're at a point where they're talking about it. And I really think it's a result of what happened last fall. There was just this explosion of people sharing their stories, whether it was on Parliament Hill, campus, the military, the media. People just said enough is enough. And I think that's what we're seeing now is a trickling effect from that massive explosion of dialogue last fall.
Julie, was there a trigger in particular that you can recall that you think led to more and more people coming forward?
CBC's John Ghomeshi story, I still to this day, looking back on it, have no idea what it was about that story that just cracked the shell open, but everyone I know who works in the sector will tell you that that story was a watershed moment for the folks on the ground who work in sexual assault centers, We saw an increase to calls to support lines. We saw unprecedented media coverage, and the word rape culture was sort of in the mainstream. It was part of people's lexicon. Whether or not they agreed that it existed or not, people were talking about it, and that's unprecedented.
And do you want to go so far as to say that, and we're not making any comments on the charges that he's facing right now, but in a weird way, Gomeshi may have made a positive contribution to this issue because it was the trigger that allowed others to come forward.
Well, I've actually written about this. Yes, there's a definite irony in the fact that this man who presented himself as a very enlightened feminist on air, someone people trusted, particularly women who invited them into their homes and cars daily. In fact, there was a trigger moment where what the charges against him, I think, were so there's a shock. And I think the fact that there were so many women and that it required so many women to be taken seriously resonated really widely. So yes, I do think that there was, and it was also summoned the Yes All Women hashtag. It went crazy on social media.
Oren, we are in the year 2015. We are not 50 years ago. You might have expected that this wouldn't be an issue anymore. Why is it still?
Well, I disagree. I would have still expected it because I have a different perception of people. My standard's not that high. I work with very many people in different capacities. And I think the reason it's still around with us is that there's been no huge impetus for people to change. We're social animals. So if in certain contexts this is the norm, if there's no negative repercussions, now we're seeing the repercussions, but it takes time for it to finally sink in that this is something we shouldn't do. We would like to think as enlightened beings we wouldn't need these reminders, but the reality is that people will do what they want to do. They'll seek pleasure. They will just act with impunity if there's no negative consequence. And it's been a long time that there have been few tangible consequences.
You, Peggy, are a fun guest to have on programs like this because you tend to take, as you do in your column, a contrarian view to a lot of things. Do you want to present that view here today, or where are you on this?
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
I'll say that the problem of sexual misconduct in society has been wildly overstated, especially if you look at the historical dimensions of the issue. And anyone who's been around for the past 20 years or so, or 30 years, will tell you that sexual misconduct and harassment in almost all workplaces is a dramatically different situation than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Of course, we haven't eradicated the problem entirely, but the vast majority of men would never consider the kind of behavior that was fairly routine 30 or 40 years ago, either in the workplace or on campus. And so we've developed a kind of a moral panic around this issue, which is simply unwarranted by the facts on the ground.
And you've researched this? What do you think?
I disagree. I think that I don't disagree with the fact that tolerances are far different than they were 30 years ago. Absolutely, that has changed. However, I think what we're seeing now, because social media was not around 30 years ago, I'm not, and this is where a very interesting area of gray. We are seeing a level of virulence. We see it in terms of the shout-outs against camera, women trying to do their work. We see it at Dalhousie. We've seen it's like a rock has been lifted. And I think that is basically what has created this new conversation about what are the limits and what are our new levels of tolerance. I don't think we're there yet. And I don't know whether it's been overstated or understated. What I see is enough to say change has to happen.
Julie, this is, I'm going to get personal with you here if you don't mind, because this is not an academic experience for you. This is something that you have experienced in your life. Share as much as you want to of your own personal experience on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation for me because I've worked in this field for over 10 years. I have 2 degrees in gender studies, so I know this on an intimate level, but I've also experienced it personally. And the irony that I was invited last fall to give a talk and a training to all officer cadets at the Royal Military College of Canada on what is consent, what is sexual assault under the law, and what can you do as a bystander if you see something. And the fact that I was sexually harassed, both at the briefings and in having spoken out about it, speaks to the fact that we have a problem. And looking back on what happened to me last fall and the fallout since then, since I've come forward with my story, if it wasn't so problematic and if it wasn't so worrisome, it would be hilarious, right? Like, people have said to me, you can't write better satire than the fact that you're there to talk about what to do if you see someone being sexually harassed, and you were being sexually harassed.
Why don't you tell us about the different components that actually go into testing someone's intelligent quotient?
Well, I think one of the things that people run into is that they take some kind of IQ test online. And they think that that's, probably a valid measure of their IQ. But really, when you get your IQ tested by a psychologist, for real, one-on-one, there are a lot more components to it than what you would see in an online test. So very often we have you solving puzzles and, telling stories and answering questions, defining words, possibly doing math problems, a real variety of things.
And by the time you get to the end of it, you've got a good sense about how intelligent somebody is?
We do, and also have a sense of their strengths and weaknesses. So we can take a look at, for instance, some folks are stronger verbally, some people are good at novel problem solving, and some people are good at math, some people are good at spatial reasoning, so we look at that as well.
We mentioned off the top that its origins go back actually about a century. Can you tell us more about who created it and how?
Yes, it was originally developed in France to identify children that needed special educational support, and that's still primarily really how we use it today. When Binet developed it in France, it was then brought to the US by Terman, who brought it to Stanford University, and the Stanford Binet is still one of the major tests that we use today to assess children and adults, to look at their intelligence and also to look at their different cognitive abilities.
One of the other expressions I hear besides IQ testing is also cognitive assessment. Is that essentially the same thing?
We've been using cognitive assessment more recently as a broader term. IQ testing was originally used for the tests because we were primarily trying to derive one single IQ score to know how smart someone was. And with the greater emphasis now in looking at people's different cognitive abilities, we tend to call it cognitive assessment. But the person on the street still pretty much thinks about IQ.
And let me ask about that, because I think even Binet himself a century ago was saying this thing does have its limitations. You can't, it's not gospel. Is that still the case today?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've gotten better. We've made, great strides in 100 years. But I think people kind of get the impression that it's kind of like we do an X-ray and we see how smart you are. And it's not like that. It's certainly filtered through the questions that we choose to ask and the norm group that we're comparing you to. So the way IQ tests or cognitive assessments work now is that we have a variety of these tasks. We give them to thousands of people and see how they perform, and then you're being compared to that group.
Well, of course, here's the big question, and that is, after 100 years of doing these kinds of tests, admittedly with their evolution and changes, do you think intelligence is primarily innate or acquired?
It's both. That's something that we can never really separate out, sorry. I know you're trying to pin me down, but it's all cognitive abilities develop in a person developmentally in response to their environment and in interaction with their environment. So you can't really separate that out. You could have, the child of Einstein and Marie Curie, and if you raised them in a dark closet, they would not be very intelligent. You need the environmental input as well as decent genetics in order to get anything. We know that there is a biological and genetic component. We see there are children, for example, with genetic disorders that affect their intellectual functioning or their IQ, such as Down syndrome. There are other genetic errors that can happen, like Fragile X, that will affect intellectual functioning. So we know there is a biological sort of component to it, but how much of that develops, how much intelligence you actually develop and can use, depends on what you're exposed to in the world.
How are you defining EQ?
Emotional intelligence is your ability to read and understand emotions in yourself and other people. It's also what you do with that knowledge. Once you understand emotions, how you use them to guide your behavior, to build relationships, and to achieve the outcomes that you want in life.
In your book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, you describe it thus: the daily challenge of dealing effectively with emotions is critical to the human condition because our brains are hardwired to give our emotions the upper hand. Let's understand that better. What do you mean our brains are hardwired to give emotions the upper hand?
Well, everything we experience in the world around us has to enter at the base of the brain. And as it travels across the brain, these signals travel through the limbic system first. So the limbic system is where emotional reactions are generated. This means we have an emotional reaction to events first. All the way in the far end of the brain, above your eyes, that's where you have a rational reaction to what you're experiencing. So we're hardwired to have this emotional reaction first before we're able to rationally think about what we're experiencing. This is something that was great in the caveman days. If a saber-toothed tiger jumps out behind a rock, you want to have a quick emotional reaction and escape, and it's essential to your survival. It isn't such a great sort of hardwiring when you're responding to a curt email that someone down the hall sent to you. It's far more often than not in today's world, having a rational perspective on events is a far more effective one.
Okay, you recently wrote a column for the Globe and Mail in which you listed a number of the traits that somebody who's got a high EQ has, and I'm going to sort of make a list of these here. Let's go through them one by one. Maybe you could just give me a sort of a brief reply as to why you think these are good EQ traits. For example, if you have a robust emotional vocabulary, you're considered to have a high EQ. What's the significance of a robust emotional vocabulary?
That's a vocabulary that you can't develop without studying emotions. So people who understand their emotions, who are very aware of them as they happen, tend to have words to describe them. People who don't have a robust emotional vocabulary are usually that way because they don't spend much time thinking about or understanding emotions.
You're curious about people. You have a high EQ. What's the significance of that?
Well, curiosity about people is linked to a skill that's called social awareness. This is one of the 4 core emotional intelligence skills. And social awareness is really about how well you understand what's going on with other people, not just emotionally, but what they're trying to contribute to you, or communicate to you. So that curiosity tends to go hand in hand with a high level of social awareness.
People with high EQs know their strengths and weaknesses? That sounds pretty self-evident on the face of it, no?
Yeah, that's linked to the skill of self-awareness. And self-awareness is really the foundation of emotional intelligence. You can't possibly manage your behavior or form effective relationships until you're aware of what you're doing and what you're about and what you're bringing to the table in any given situation.
Having not just a smart boss, which people want, but a boss who is really on top of the EQ charts as well, you think is very important. How come?
Well, we find that 90% of top performers in the workplace are high in emotional intelligence. So when leaders, bosses, managers are high in EQ, they tend to be very strong motivators of people. They get results because they're able to really prime the emotional state of other people and motivate the group to achieve objectives. They also understand people. And let's face it, we all want to be understood, especially by our boss who makes a lot of decisions that affect how we do at work. And this is why this emotional intelligence is really a strong skill for leaders to have.
Now, I noted at the back of your book, you've got sort of a checklist of quite interesting statistics, and one of them is that CEOs and other senior executives, on average, have the lowest EQ scores in the workplace. Now, why would that be the case?
Well, this is a finding that's really counterintuitive to this idea that most top-performing leaders are high in EQ. And what we found is that companies, middle managers on average have the highest emotional intelligence in the workforce. And that's because companies promote people into management positions because they're good with people. Above that, it's a ski slope all the way down to CEOs, where director levels and above, companies promote people increasingly based on tenure, based on their knowledge, and based on short-term financial gains that they've achieved. Now, within each of these categories, the highest performers are those that actually have high degrees of emotional intelligence. So companies are shooting themselves in the foot by promoting people for the wrong reasons. They're looking at this narrow view of what people bring to the table rather than the whole picture of the skills that enable leaders to succeed.
I think many of our viewers will be aware of the PBS series Nova, which has been around for, I think, a couple of decades now, doing programs on various scientific topics. And Catherine, we're going to take a look at a clip that you did for a video for Nova. This is called The Secret Life of Scientists and Engineers. Okay, Sheldon, let's roll that clip, please.
There's often a perceived conflict between science and faith. It's a little bit like coming out of the closet, admitting to people that you are a Christian and you are a scientist. My husband, he is the pastor of an evangelical church, and many people would approach him to ask him questions about climate change. If anything, there's even more questions in the Christian community because we are targeted by so much of the disinformation that's going on.
First of all, I have to say I love the way you dress up for TVO and you dress down for PBS. We like that. Thank you. Second thing is, who do you see as targeting the Christian community with disinformation?
Our thought leaders. And behind them, you know, for a long time people thought it's the fossil fuel industry. And back in the 90s and the early 2000s it was. But today it's not really the fossil fuel industry that's spearheading this kind of climate science denial movement. It's all of the people who recognize that climate change requires collective action. It requires government policy. And so these messages are being fed to us through the conservative media. They're being fed to us through politicians. And in the more conservative Christian circles in the US, there's a huge leadership vacuum. You know, Catholics have the Pope, Anglicans have the Archbishop of Canterbury, Episcopals have their own bishop who says great things about climate change and environmental issues. But when you get into Baptists, Pentecostals, Assemblies of God, evangelical free churches, there aren't those leaders in the church who are willing to stand up and say, this is what is true. So where do we go? We go to the media, we go to our politicians and our thought leaders, we go to people who share our values, and they're telling us this thing is a big hoax.
Well, let me talk about a leader of a different kind. Actually, he kind of has his own church. Rush Limbaugh. He's got millions upon millions of adherents who worship at the Church of Rush every day and says things during his sermons such as, if you believe in God, then intellectually you cannot believe in man-made global warming. How challenging is it, therefore, for people like you to get your message out to conservatives when you're competing with the likes of this?
It's tough, and I'm going to be totally honest. If I could do one thing, if I had a magic wand or one wish, I would change what conservative media in the United States says about climate change. That's the one thing I would do. But given that I don't have that magic wish, what I do when I talk to people is you don't counter those types of arguments with science. You don't pull out, 3,000 pages of scientific reports from the latest IPCC report and smack them upside the head with it. What you do is you have to meet people where they're at. So in that case, with that very frequent argument that, oh, if God's in control, this couldn't happen, you little humans are being so arrogant, assuming you could change something as big as the planet. We have to go to the Bible, which is actually not that hard to do, and just say, look, God made the planet, God gave it to us, God told us that actions have consequences. Here's this verse and this verse and this verse that say these things. And here's how our choices and our actions have created the consequences we're seeing today.
And how persuasive do you find that argument when you make it to conservative audiences?
Extremely, if they're willing to listen.
If they're willing to listen. So that's another challenge as well.
Yes. I only go where I'm invited. I don't push my way into places, trying to elbow people out of the way. But if people are willing to have me, I tell this to them. And the responses I get, the worst case scenario is, I used to think climate change wasn't real, but you answered all my arguments. So now I have to make a decision. If I'm going to keep on thinking it isn't real, I have to have new arguments or else I have to change my mind. If I can get people to that point, I feel like that's the right place to be.
Right on. Matt, again, going back to that chart with the 5 values that you had on it before, when Rush Limbaugh says the things that he says, what moral arguments is he trying to tap into in order to address his flock?
He's saying if you believe in God, you can't believe in climate change. That's definitely within the realm of within the realm of purity, sanctity, for sure.
The expression global warming, which is what everybody used to call it.
Yes.
We don't call it that anymore. Now it's climate change. How problematic was that in terms of trying to advance the debate?
So there's actually some literature on this suggesting that it was very problematic, that you could ask the exact same question but just replace global warming with climate change or vice versa, and you'd get different responses. So yeah, I think that's quite problematic, and I think that connects with the notion of the difference between weather and climate, where if someone says it's global warming and it's cold outside and colder than usual outside, then it's hard for us to understand. So along those lines.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety if you want. They're on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.